could you just clarify, just for people that aren't familiar with you, where you came from at 13?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, because we're like, why? This is the interview. Why not? This is the best way. So I grew up in what was formerly the former Soviet Union. It was the Soviet Union when I was growing up. It is now Russia. And I grew up in what was called Leningrad, which now is called St. Petersburg, where I went back. My family and I went back for the first time last summer, which was 30 years since we left. So we left in 1989, right before everything broke open. So we left in May of 1989. So that was right in the fall of 1989 is when the Berlin Wall came down, when everything kind of changed. So that's when we left. We're Jewish. Jews were persecuted at the time. So that's how we got permission to leave. And then we spent 2.5 months in refugee camps in first in Vienna and then in Italy, where the Americans had set up this huge infrastructure, because about 450,000 Russian Jews came that way during that year. And so we spent the time in refugee camps applying for permission to get refugee status, which we were very, very grateful to have. And then we came to the States. Our American dream began in Ypsilanti, which is a little town. It's about 40 minutes outside Detroit. It's right next to Ann Arbor in Michigan. It's not a very, no offense to anyone from Ypsilanti, it's not a very fabulous place. And, you know, we lived in public housing, very, very grateful to have welfare and food stamps to get going. But it was our dream, but it was a tough beginning for an American dream.
Especially at 13.
Especially at 13, you know, my daughter, to whom my book is dedicated, Mia, she's 16. She's in that room over there on virtual high school. You know, so when I was working on my first book, she was exactly the age that I was when I came here, 13 and a half. And yeah, it's, you know, I've often said to Mia that I'm not sure I would wish on her the hardship that I've been through and my family, but there's also just a depth of perspective and gratitude that is with me because of that. You know, I say to my family often, my love language is cooking. One of my love languages is cooking. So I cook a lot. And this is an honest statement. This is not an exaggeration. I never open the fridge and not experience a moment of gratitude for the food. That's never happened in 31 years because you know, I'm not going to tell you that I ever felt hungry in Russia, although there were always food shortages, and my parents would pull me out of school so we could go stand in the bread line or the butter line. So they would sometimes like have rations where they would, like, everyone would say, oh my God, there's butter. And so my parents would pull me out of school so I could stand in line with them, because then I'm another person I could get to. So it was always food shortages, and my parents somehow made do, but being in a refugee settlement, I do remember being hungry. My parents gave me 2 meals a day. My mom would give me breakfast, and then she would say, don't come home till like 7, because there's no more food and you're gonna be hungry. And by home, we shared a 2-room apartment with another family that was coming the same journey. And I remember, I mean, at 13, you're hungry all the time. My daughter can eat the entire fridge. You know, there's just like a crazy appetite, right? Like when I asked her before this, I was like, are you having lunch? And she was like, yes, this and this and this and this, you know, like they're great at. So I remember being really hungry, and all I wanted was a slice of pizza. All I wanted, because we didn't have pizza in Russia, that didn't exist. So I was dying for a slice of pizza, and my parents couldn't afford it. Like, there wasn't any lira to buy any kind of pizza. And so 30 years ago, when we went back, my husband, my daughter, and I went back to the area in Italy where we stayed. It's called Ladispoli. It's now a beautiful beach town. The first thing we did was buy a lot of pizza. And one of my favorite moments, it was the best pizza I've ever had, and I have no idea if it's any good, but it was, yeah, so I don't, you know, there's so many challenges about what we went through. And I say, by the way, that the first word that I identify with is refugee. Before woman, before mother, before entrepreneur, before author, it's not an event, it's an experience that continues to impact everything. But there are many gifts from it that I carry.
That is so beautiful. I just, it makes me love my grandparents even more, because they came from, they were first generation here and
Where did they come from?
Spain and Italy, but they were in like the ghetto of New York, down on Mulberry Street, which was a ghetto, and then moved to the Bronx, which was like a farm,
Mm.
and everyone that came from Italy, my grandmother was married at 16.
Wow.
And everyone that came from Italy from the family stayed in her house. So for a 16-year-old to manage that, it's like what you're saying, what your parents, it's like what you do.
It's what you do. And, there's a lot of, there's kind of this common language with other like refugee kids who came over. We're not kids anymore, but I connect to any other refugee immediately, regardless of the experience, because especially when you come at that age, at that age, you don't know who you are, period.
Right.
13, you're like a soup of emotions, you're like, and then all of a sudden, everything is gone.
Yeah.
And the thing that we always connect on is you become the parent. You grow up really, really fast. And it's funny because as teenagers, I think all we want is to be in charge. And then all of a sudden you are learning English faster than your parents. You are understanding, like I had to take my dad to the bank to open the first bank account because I just understood things faster.
Right.
And then you quickly realize it's not a role you want to be in. And there's actually, I've since done a lot of research around this because I study behavior in the brain so much, but it's a really difficult experience to go through to realize your parents cannot guide you because they have no idea, because we want our parents to be our protectors. And all of a sudden everyone's making fun of me in school because I look weird because I have 2 outfits from welfare store and I don't speak English right. And when I come home, my dad is telling me how everyone's making fun of him at work.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden you're an equal, your parents can't protect you. And that actually is, it took me, I had to get to kind of a really difficult time in my life several years ago to really unpack that and understand the impact. So I always tell my daughter, don't try to grow up so fast. Like, take your time.
Yeah. That's a beautiful, I never really even thought about that. How it switches, but you're right. I can remember instances in my life too, where you become I had become the caregiver.
Yeah. And it's really, and again, I always tell everyone, my parents, they are amazing and we're really close. And my husband and I look at each other all the time and say, like, this age, like, can you imagine having nothing and just take off or to try and come to another country? It's, so they're amazing and they didn't know any better, but there's a lot, several years ago, I write about this in my book. I talk about this a lot, right? I went through a really terrible, dark time. I burnt out, I broke down. It was really, really hard. And it took me getting there to recognize, to look back that a lot of what I was carrying in me was this kind of sense of responsibility that I had to like try to make everyone happy, because it's really hard to see your parents have so much fear. And my parents didn't talk about it. We come from a culture where kind of talking about your feelings is a luxury no one had, because life was really hard and it was hard for everyone. It was really hard for Jewish people in Russia. And so it was a luxury, just toughed it out and moved forward. And I carried all these emotions and all these things. And I thought my job was to be happy and make everyone happy. And for me, that meant to never acknowledge a difficult feeling or an experience or having fear. So, that's why when I talk about happiness, I talk about it. It's not about feeling positive all the time. It's actually about learning how to embrace yourself as a human being with all the different emotions that you feel. Because for me, when I broke down, when I got to that really dark place, that is what happened. All those negative emotions that I had been trying to not feel, well, they were all there and they all came out. As Carl Jung has a great quote, right? He says, that which you resist persists.
Yeah.
So it's not, we live in, so I think I find, especially in the United States, there's a little bit of this culture of positivity, turn your frown upside down, just look for the silver lining. And You know, I run a company called Happier. I wear yellow. There's nothing wrong with joy and happiness. It's what we're all here for. But I think a really important thing to recognize that all of our emotions have a place. And it's not, we can't just feel good all the time. And so I really, you know, this has been one of the core philosophies of what I teach, is because I had to learn it for myself, is it's not about positive emotions, about negative emotions. It's about emotions, and some are harder to feel than others, but the true, I think, lasting, genuine meaning and happiness comes when we allow it.
I love that. Nataly, you're such a beautiful beacon of light, and it is accepting all of ourselves, our struggles and our successes.
Absolutely. And you know, it's hard, right? Because difficult feelings are hard to feel. Like, it's hard to feel sad. You know, sadness for me was probably the emotion I used to fear the most. So it's a really funny story. So I really, one of my life mantras is friends don't call friends on the phone, because I hate the phone. Like, if my phone rings, I'm like, oh my God, bad news, what happened? And so like the rule in my life is do not call me. If you're gonna call me, you text me first and you tell me you're gonna call me. And if you're calling me, the first thing you must say is everything is amazing, like everything is fine. But the reason is, it took me a while to understand why I am like that. And the reason is because like I grew up really close with my parents and my grandparents. In fact, my grandpa just passed away in September. He was 96.
Wow.
My mom's parents both came with us. My grandma passed away only 3 years ago, so they lived a very long life, and we were very close. I mean, grandparents in Russia are kind of parents. I think my daughter would tell you that my parents are basically second parents to her. Like, she doesn't call them grandparents. And we lived kind of next door to my dad's parents. That's where I went after school. So I grew up so close with my grandparents, and it took me a long time to realize I lived in fear of them dying. And part of that fear was I was afraid to feel sad. Like, I thought that if I would feel sad, I would just get stuck in feeling sad, and I would never feel anything else. And I share that because I know from, you know, I now have the gift of working with hundreds of thousands of people just through what I do. I think most of us, we fear allowing ourselves to actually feel a difficult feeling like sadness, because we think we'll be stuck in it forever. But what we learn when we learn to just allow our feelings is, first of all, research shows that when you feel a feeling, a difficult feeling, and you actually acknowledge it, you feel it for a shorter amount of time, and you feel it with less intensity because you're not trying to not feel it. But the other thing we learn is we can feel many different things at the same time. You know, I remember when it was my grandma's funeral 3 years ago, and my cousins came up, my mom's brother's kids, and it was her funeral. It was a horrible, sad day. But all of a sudden, we were all laughing our butts off in the kitchen because we got into a heated argument about which of her cakes was the best. She was an amazing baker. And okay, first of all, it's the chocolate one. So everyone needs to get on my team right now. And if you think it's the strawberry one, you're off. You just don't have your marbles in the right place. So everyone here is now on the chocolate team.
Yes.
It's a 4-layer chocolate walnut homemade cake. Come on, come
Right.
on. But we were laughing and we were yelling, and it was like, we were like, what are you talking? And then the whole family joined in, and they were like, no. And there were like these two camps, because these were her two epic cakes, and people were laughing and yelling. And I had this moment of, oh my God, we feel sad, of course, but we also feel joy, and we also feel love, and we're laughing. And it was just this direct experience of the fact that we have the capacity as human beings to feel so many different things. So we don't need to fear difficult feelings. We don't need to fear that they will push out everything else. We have to learn how to embrace them with compassion.
You're almost making me cry, because right now it's such a challenging time. And I think that's right. I read a lot of things about, you know, did you clean the 50 closets you were supposed to? And did you do this and do that, and just be? And you're right. Like, sometimes I'm just, not happy. And
And
that's okay.
and that makes you human.
Yeah.
That's what and that makes you human, you know.
Yeah.
It's and again, you know, there's I think there's a big difference that I've come to understand between feelings and thoughts. You know, our feelings, I think of them as their input, right? You feel something, you know, most of the time we're not actually quite sure. And psychologists and biologists aren't quite sure why feeling comes, right? Sometimes you feel sad and nothing is actually going on. And maybe it's something you from a couple of weeks ago. So I think of feelings as inputs, and can we approach them with openness and acceptance and compassion? Our thoughts, AKA the stories our brain creates, well, that is within our control. And this is actually what I'm working on for my next book, is really this idea that there's so many challenges in life, of course, and there's challenges always. Now we're living through this unimaginable challenge, but struggle is something that we create. Struggle comes from how our brain reacts to the challenge, the story it tells us about our challenge, how we treat ourselves through that challenge. And our thoughts is something that we can control. And it's you know, we all have a complicated relationship with our brain, so it takes practice. This is what I teach. But yeah, this pressure, you know, to feel good. I think it, I know in my case, like I really felt I would be cheating like this American dream gift that I got if I didn't feel happy all the time. Like I got this amazing gift. My parents sacrificed so much. I sacrificed so much. Oh my God, I have to be like, feel good all the time. And I remember when I started, one of the commitments I made to myself after I went through a really difficult time is to just be more open with everyone, right? So, you know, it's gotten to a point where like, this is how I am. I can be on a stage in front of 10,000 people, or I can be doing a one-on-one leadership session. This is how I am with my family. Like there is no different Natalys anymore. I used to have all these very curated, the mom, you know, the entrepreneur, the leader, the friend. It was very, you know, that it takes a lot to manage all our different identities. But I remember when I started to share, you know, just with the Happier community, that I was struggling. And I had a lot of fear about doing that because I thought they would all just call me a fraud, you know. Founded a company called Happier. You're running a book called Happier Now. And what? And you know what came back at me when I became more open? And I've said this before, just unconditional love. And I don't mean romantic love. I just mean an outpouring of people sharing what a relief it was to know that I'm a normal human being, that it gave them hope. That look, if, you know, the CEO of a company called Happier has horrible days, that's okay for them too. And that's what I think that ultimately is what we're all here to do. You know, Jean, you and I started by talking about connection, right? I shared stories of how your husband, who I never knew personally, obviously, or my dad, was this really big, important presence in our lives. And I think that is the gift that we can give to each other. It's just that gift of open human connection. That's it. That's what we want.
Absolutely. And I think this time that we're all being asked to isolate more, we're realizing I took that for granted. I took for granted when I could hug my girlfriends, and
Yep.
you know, especially now with Alex not being here, and you are the first, you know, really public thing I've done since his passing, and it really, I think this time has turned the perception back inside. What's really important for you? You're not allowed to be so distracted by the outer world. What is it that Nataly loves? What is it that Jean loves? What is it that Alison loves? And because life is fleeting and life is precious. And Nataly, I wanted to ask you, one of the things, my God, we could talk all afternoon. What do you have a practice that you do in the morning to kind of set your oars in the water, or, you know?
I love that. The oars in the water. Yes. So the short answer is yes. The longer answer is it's not the same every morning. And it's interesting. Yeah. And it's something I really want to communicate to everyone. You know, there is no magic answer for any of this. And so we just have to give ourselves a lot of flexibility and grace. But I do. So I'll tell you a couple elements that are always there. contrary to what many people think, I'm a total introvert. It surprises everyone. I mean, given what I do for work, but I really am. And all that means is I get my energy by being alone. That's where introverts get energy. So it's really important for me in the morning to just have some, I call it my quiet time. It's like a little kid who needs a quiet time. And sometimes it's me doing a little 10 minutes of watercolor, because one of the things I've discovered that brings me so much joy is painting. So sometimes it's a little watercolor. Sometimes I'll sit, I have my favorite little chair in a corner with tea, and I'll read a couple pages from a book and I have this shelf of books. I call them my books that give me a soul hug, right? So I'll just pull one off and I'll read it. Sometimes I just sit and that's it. But it's really, the mornings where for whatever reason I don't do that, the whole day, the oars are not in the water, or they are, but they're like this. The other thing that I do every day, just sometimes not in the morning, but most mornings, is I take a walk. So we live outside of Boston, which means that between April and November, it's fantastic. And I go for 5 miles, and that's my like active meditation. December, January, February, March, it's an act of resilience and persistence, and try not to curse too much because it's so cold. Like, I still have not warmed up for my walk I took this morning. I don't know if you saw, we're getting some huge storm, the whole East Coast. It's cold. So, but that morning walk for me is kind of my walking meditation. And, it's a really important kind of, I call these my daily anchors, Jean. These are my daily anchors. So a little bit of quiet time. And I really encourage folks to be open. You don't have to call it meditation. You can just call it to sit and be quiet. It was easier for me to do that. A walk. And then the thing that I do always do is a gratitude practice. That is something that is there. And sometimes I'll write down a couple things I'm grateful for. Sometimes I'll just consciously pause and think of them. Sometimes I write on little sticky notes, gratitudes for my husband and my daughter, and I'll put them on the kitchen counter. But that's, so I would say those 3 elements are always there.
Beautiful. I love that. And I love that you allow yourself to mix it up, that you're not regime and feel guilty if you don't do, some type of strong meditation or something like that. And I think those words, the words like God and meditation and spirituality, they're cloaked with so much beliefs. And, I think we're really now trying to just embrace life as it shows up,
and whatever that means for you. The story I always tell about meditation, I wish someone earlier in my life told me, listen, it's just about sitting down and just checking in with yourself. If someone had told me this, I would have tried it 20 years ago. But because I created the story around meditation, that it's like you have to sit like this, right, and cross your legs and not have any thoughts, I denied myself that moment of just self-check-in and awareness, because I was like, oh, I'm not the person who meditates, right? We all create these stories. Just like I told myself for 40 years, I am not a spiritual person. It was just the story I created, because spirituality to me, and my stupid story in my head, was it's like that woo-woo thing people do when they can't take reality, okay? We all have, like you're saying, this meaning that we assign to these things, and then we prevent ourselves from doing them. If someone had told me 20 years ago, listen, meditation is just when you just check in with yourself and just become aware of how you feel in your thoughts, I would have been like, oh yeah, I'll do that. And so I always tell people, and that's why, like, it was actually on my webinar this morning, we were talking, I was like, don't call it meditation. Just check in with yourself. Like, it's a practice that I teach, a check in with yourself. We check in with our friends, right? We check in, we say, how are you? How are you feeling? Well, when was the last time you did that with yourself? You don't have to call it meditation. You can just say, I'm checking in with myself. And that, so like it's so interesting, Jean, you're getting to, this is my whole like bigger why for the work that I do is, look, these messages I'm sharing, these teachings, they are thousands of years old, right? They have been here. We're all just messengers, but I'm always trying to find a way to make them the most accessible for the greatest number of awesome humans. And so I create these little practices, I give them names, and that's what drives me, is just to get us to do them. Who cares what we call them?
Right, accessibility, and letting go of the story, which I think is great, Because
We all have them.
yeah, and I think Jean is right that so many people might be like intimidated.
Yes.
Or put off. Yeah.
Yes. Or where we make it so, so to me, like this is, you get the core, right? So I teach the happier method. What is at the core of it is that happiness is a skill. It's not, some people have it, some people don't. It's a skill, like any skill. Playing piano, learning a language, cooking, writing. It's a skill. The more you practice, the better you become. When you don't practice, you don't become better. And to me, it's incredibly liberating to think of happiness as a skill, because that means that wherever you are, you can just practice. You don't have to change yourself. You don't have to change your life. You don't have to go to Nepal and meditate for a month. You just begin to practice. And I think like this is my goal in life, right? This is my bigger why, is to get to every single human in the world and get them to practice their happiness as a skill, because we all do have access to it. But again, it's letting ourselves have a little bit of space away from our story, and also not treating it as, kind of this like black and white thing, like what we've just talked about, right? Happiness doesn't mean you never feel sad. It doesn't. It's not possible. It doesn't mean that you're like gaga, rogue, like yes person all the time. I have awful days. I feel sad. I get overwhelmed. I have fear. My voice of doubt can be loud, but I just practice the skills. And I think that this is why I do, I never growing up thought, like if someone said to me, oh, Nataly, when you're 45, you're going to be a teacher of emotional fitness and happiness skills. I'd be like, what the F is your problem? That is never. Okay. Because I had all the stories, but I do what I do because I was the last person in the world that I thought any of these practices would work for. And they've completely not just changed my life. I mean, I don't think it's dramatic to say they saved my life and my family and my ability to thrive. And again, I think it's not looking for these huge dramatic changes and recognizing that small changes in mindset make a huge difference. It's giving ourselves the freedom and flexibility and grace to feel different feelings and not be like, I should not feel bad today. I got a lot done. Why do I feel bad? People tell me, I have all these blessings. I feel horrible that I'm not feeling great. And and then again, thinking of it as a practice. If you're having a rough day, you're having a rough day, but what can you do to feel a little better? What can you practice? Is it gratitude? Is it acceptance? Is it self-care? I think, as human beings, we have an amazing way to make things really complicated. I think so, Jean, to your point, like you made this motion, even like things are coming back inside. I think we have an opportunity to look within and recognize that we have a lot of these tools. We're just not using them.
Well, your website, your book, Happier Now, which I love, it's right on my shelf of go-to. I love it. Nataly, you're such a beacon of light in our world, and I love your practices. They're practical, they're fun, they're inspiring, and your rippling effect is profound.
Thank you
I'm
so much.
Grateful. No, I'm so grateful to be able to connect with both of you. I'm so grateful for the work you're doing. I often say at the end of these, like, whatever I can share, I say to people, I've passed the baton. It's now yours. Go do the practice. And, the way that we help each other is we do the practices, right? Because as human beings, we are all connected and our emotions are contagious. Our practices are contagious. And, the more that we can all go within and practice these, that's how we spread the goodness around. And boy, does our world need it right now. So I'm so grateful to be able to connect with both of you. This is totally a fangirl moment for me. Must say, like I said, this is a total fangirl moment. I love what you are doing with your website, and I cannot wait to have both of you on my webinar. We'll have to set a date, but I cannot wait to introduce our huge Happier family to what you're doing.
Thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to that.